What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Early Read Conference Preview Series, rolling on, and we move on to the Sun Belt Conference, a conference that has risen to the top of, in my opinion, the Group of Five standards, but a lot of turnover coming in, some new coaches taking over, some teams that were at the top recently, potentially taking a step back. Pumped to get into each team in the Sun Belt. And to do that, we bring on Thro Nystrom at Thor KU on Twitter. He is a college football and NFL draft analyst for Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Thor, thanks for joining the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Good to be with you again. I'm extremely happy and excited to talk about the Sun Belt. I agree with you. I do think that it is. I mean, it was on the bottom, as recently as 4 years ago in the entire FBS. I think it's climbed over everyone, including the AAC in the G5 and, just top to bottom. And this year, I think we're going to see a couple teams jump up to, from the bottom echelon to the top and vice versa. So I think that there's some value to be had in the preseason win totals in the Sun Belt.
Oh, absolutely. I see this as a conference, maybe not as great as last year, but it's a conference in transition. And usually transition means that there's some betting value to be found. So let's get right into this, though. We're going to go in alphabetical order today in terms of win totals. We're going to start actually with the favorite to win the Sun Belt in Appalachian State. Their win total stands at 8.5, shaded towards the under. And I'm just pulling from DraftKings here in terms of the futures price to win the Sun Belt. And you can find Appalachian State at, if I could find it really fast as I scroll, you can find them at 3-1 to win the Sun Belt this season. So App State, they go last year to the Sun Belt, even though early in the year we didn't know who was playing quarterback. Joey Aguilar ends up taking over. They were 30th in EPA per play last year, but they lose their starting running back, Nate Noel. The offensive line, I mean, their starting tackle, he died this spring suddenly. So, I mean, obviously thoughts and prayers to them, but there's some questions now to answer on that offensive line and if Aguilar can handle that. The defensive line should be pretty stout, though, especially for Sun Belt standards. Ranked 35 and 35th in EPA per play last season in passing, but they lose their best cornerback and their safety. So there's questions on if this team could hold up as the favorite. Thor, do you think that Appalachian State is the best team in the Sun Belt, or do you think that maybe there's some value to be had going against the Mountaineers?
There's some teams we're going to talk about that I'm well higher on than consensus and then well lower on than consensus. Appalachian State is a team where I would say I'm a bit lower than consensus, but not the huge divide.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of for the conference championship, I am fading them. We will get to the team that I think is going to win the Sun Belt and has a puncher's chance to play in the CFP this year in a bit. They do play Appalachian State, so we're going to see those two head to head. Appalachian State, the thing they have going for them, you mentioned some of the returning production that they have, including at the quarterback, but you also mentioned the losses that they had. A couple ones on offense, one of them being tragic. The running back was awesome for them in the recent past. And you have coaching continuity there, but one thing that I don't love about that team, I don't like Aguilar as much as some people do. Last year, so he comes in and he throws for 3,757 yards, 33 touchdowns. He did give the offense a spark. The thing with him, though, his game exists on the razor's edge. Aguilar last year finished number 2 in the country in PFF turnover-worthy plays, but didn't have a ton of turnovers on the field. His ratio for big-time throws to turnover-worthy plays was way closer to even than the TDI&T rate. If he regresses to the mean at all, and I think that is well within play, especially in this offensive environment where you're replacing 4 starters on the offensive line, you're replacing the running back, etc. If he regresses at all, that offense falls. We know the run game is going to be going down a bit. If the passing game does as well, and then the turnovers spike, which is Aguilar's game, it just wasn't manifesting last year. That's where that team falls off a bit. My adjusted win total on them, what did you say it is live right now, Reed?
8.5. And
okay,
I'm looking at FanDuel for that. It's minus 138 to the under. So I would say like closer to like 8.25 than 8.75.
So I'm right. I'm right on where Vegas has this. I have Appalachian State at 8.56 wins. That's going to be a pass for me as far as that goes. but definitely fading them for the Sun Belt title.
Yeah, and you go through their schedule at Clemson in week 2, at ECU, who I'm personally higher on in week 3. They also play Liberty in week 5 and maybe a G5 wild card type preview matchup. Road game at Louisiana, who should be much improved this year. They host James Madison. They play at Coastal on a short week. So there are a lot more coin flips than you'd like for a Sun Belt favorite or a win total of 8.5. So I agree. I think the talent puts them towards the top of the conference, but maybe as the short shot to win it, I'm not as interested in. I have a feeling that we are thinking the same way in terms of who we like to win this conference. So I'm excited to get through the Sun Belt and we could talk about that team. But we move to a team that a lot of people are high on going into this coming season. That's Arkansas State. They start the year losing 1-0 to Oklahoma. Butch Davis is crying on the sidelines, and Butch Jones, is crying on the sidelines. Then they find this true freshman, Jalen Rayner, and pretty electric, I would say. Really got this offense, at least an identity as the season went on. Arkansas State, they finish out a pretty solid season. They overall Rayner, 3,000 yards in 11 games, 22 touchdowns. Offense is 22nd in returning production. So there is some stuff coming back here with Wallace and Cross. They combined for 1,000 yards last season. Wide receiver has everybody back. So I think that this offense should be above average for Sun Belt standards, but the defense was really poor. They tried to force turnovers, but really got gashed over the top. Defensive line is undersized. While they bring a lot of people back, it was bad production, right? So, how much better is it really going to be? So, you look at the Red Wolves here going into 2024. They have a win total set at 6.5, minus 184 to the under at FanDuel. Thor, obviously, again, this is expecting maybe a bit of a jump for the Red Wolves, at least steady production. Do you believe that maybe this team could push up into the higher tier?
I do. Yeah, I like the progression of Arkansas State. I love what Butch Jones is doing. He hasn't gone as far to the who's the guy at Tulsa, Kevin Wilson.
Yep.
Kevin Wilson will just outright say, I hate NIL. I don't want to do transfers. And he doubled down into the high school recruiting. And that's success there. But Tulsa defense, they absolutely should have added a couple plug and plays. I feel like Butch Jones is dominating the high school recruiting relative to his conference, but is also doing enough in the portal to just the couple holes that you have. Let's get a couple plug and plays there. I like how he's doing that. And then also in this modern era in the G5, your bigger task is you have to re-recruit the players back to your roster. Don't transfer out and go to the P4 school. He's doing that. You have 10 guys returning projected as starters on offense. It started last year, 6 on defense. The returning production metric for them on offense is 23rd in the nation. Coming back, you mentioned Raynor. The entire offense turned around the second they put him in, and everyone's returning around him. The offense is going to be better, and I also think the defense will as well. 6 starters back there. Last year, Arkansas State allows 30.4 points per game. That was the lowest of the last 5 seasons. They have not allowed less than 30 since the 2010s. I believe that they get back there on defense, just shave a couple points off that. But when you're adding points on offense, you can see real quickly how this team keeps the train rolling, keeps that momentum moving.
Yeah, you look at where Arkansas State finished the year last year, 57th in EPA per play. And again, there were a few zeros, a few real dark ones on the scorecard there. So 57th in EPA per play last season, and a lot of that was due to their ability to generate explosives. They were top 35 in both explosive pass and run rate. Rayner is without a doubt one of the more electric G5 quarterbacks. Maybe a little unpolished, but we'll see with a full offseason now as the guy. There's reason to believe that they could take at least a pretty marginal step forward. So when we go to Arkansas State here, as I pull up their schedule, they host Central Arkansas and they host Tulsa. So there's 2 hopeful wins. They're Tulsa, maybe closer to a coin flip, 2 losses at Michigan, at Iowa State. But you go through the schedule and there's an opportunity, I think, for them to potentially outperform expectation, mainly in, and we're going to talk about these teams towards the end, but South Alabama and Troy, 2 teams that are undergoing huge turnover everywhere. Arkansas State hosts both those teams. So if South Alabama and Troy aren't playing to expectation where they're projected to be in this Arkansas State range, maybe a little bit better, if they're worse than Arkansas State, all of a sudden the Red Wolves have some momentum here because They close hosting ULM and Old Dominion, and they also go to Georgia State in the final 3 weeks. So I see the potential, maybe not a bet for me, but I definitely agree with you, Thor, in that this is a team where we can maybe look up, and if maybe Texas State underachieves, Arkansas State is a team that can maybe be in the mix for a Sun Belt title with an easy closing stretch.
For sure. Yeah. With this amount of teams that are falling down, and we're going to be getting to them soon, the ones that are going to sort of fall off the shelf, Arkansas State's going the other way. So it only takes stealing a game or two of these where they're the projected underdog. Certainly you like the beginning of the schedule. You mentioned the first 2 easy games. You love the last 3 games. They should go 5-0 on each side of the polarity there. If you combined it, you've scheduled yourself 2 losses with Michigan and Iowa State. But that sort of middle part of the schedule that you were talking about, where it's the South Alabama, Texas State, Southern Miss, Troy, Louisiana, that's going to more inform where this season goes, those 5 games in there. But yeah, like I'm definitely bullish on Arkansas State. My number is right around the Vegas total at 6.58, but I would, gun to my head, I'm going over, not under that 6.5 number.
Yeah, it's like your number says something, but you also now could look at the schedule and because the number doesn't necessarily know that Troy and South Alabama might be way worse, maybe a lot more than way better. So you can maybe see an edge there on the Red Wolves. So next up, Coastal Carolina. They lose, obviously, Grayson McCall. They lose Pickney, who I thought was an absolute stud last year. They do bring back Guest, Guest is gone, but they bring back Vasco, sorry. So we'll see how that goes. Noah Kim also transfers in from Michigan State. Trickett's going to head up this offense. He comes from USFDs. I've liked him in the past. Just a lot of turnover here, though, and it makes me a little concerned if this offense, which was really teetering under Tim Beck in his first year, maybe we see a real drop-off. And the defensive line was really terrible. They were outside the top 100 in tackles for loss, but a really solid secondary. We'll see if that can hold up as well. How do you see Coastal Carolina? Because this is a team to me with a win total of 5.5, Thor. I'm not really sure how to place them because we're used to Coastal. This has been, of the last several years, the best team in the Sun Belt. Now they're trending towards like middle bottom. Is there something I'm missing here? Because not necessarily I have a strong betting opinion preseason, but it seems like a team I'm going to be probably against or staying away from.
Yeah, they're a strange team. You have 6 starters back on each side of the ball. Last year was weird in that McCall, he misses half the season, and you would have expected the offense to fall off a shelf. It actually didn't, because that Vasco kid, turns out he can run around and he can just generate offense. I kind of like Vasco, and they brought in Noah Kim from Michigan State to compete against him and or provide depth, whoever loses that. So last year, Coastal, despite playing half the season without McCall, they only lost 20 yards per game off their offensive output there, but they were terrible in the red zone.
Yeah.
So it's this weird team. They were 127th in red zone touchdown. So you're wondering, can they keep moving the ball as well as they were last year, but then do better in the red zone? Or is the yards per game going to regress and you're not going to have as many opportunities in the red zone, and then all of a sudden the points will fall off? I also don't love the defense. Last year, it was sort of the opposite deal where the defense was allowing a metric ton of yards and they get bailed out by the turnovers. I think they finished tied for 11th in the nation with 1.8 turnovers forced per game. So I mentioned Joey Aguilar before, sort of was living on the razor's edge. Last year's Coastal team was living on the razor's edge. And if you believe in Tim Beck, you probably think he's going to figure it out. You like Vasco. I don't believe in Tim Beck. So Coastal is one of these teams that I do think is falling down. That's reflected in my numbers, although it's the market's getting better every year with these summer win totals. You used to be able to get 1.5 or so of value on some of these teams that have been good in the past, but then they're very clearly going to drop down. But now these numbers are getting sharper. My number on Coastal Carolina is 5.9 wins for the fall.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's weird because my numbers also shade towards the over. I'm at 5.8. So I just don't match. My eye doesn't see what I guess my numbers are saying. And I probably a lot of that is baked into the fact that they were able to live off turnovers. And this was a really, really strong secondary. Again, 20th in EPA per pass, but they lose 2 starters. I can't get there with the defensive line, though. And while Vasco showed some life, I do wonder if Noah Kim could answer, if he could compete there. I just don't know if Coastal necessarily has a true identity without McCall. I know McCall was hurt last year. To me, it's a team trending in the wrong direction. As we quickly go through their schedule, they open on a Thursday night at Jacksonville State. They're underdogs in that game. So the market's already telling you this is another G5 team. They're already an underdog. Sure, they get William and Mary at Temple, and they host Virginia, a team that they're going to be underdogs at home, but that's a winnable game, I think. The the conference schedule, not terrible. They host ODU, they host Georgia Southern, they host App State, which is pretty tough. They close at Georgia State. So there are winnable games on the schedule, but to me, it's a team you got to kind of put your foot in the sand, right? Are you with them or against them? I'm probably closer to against them on the chance it clears this season.
Lots of coin flip games here. Looking at my win expectancy is the Jacksonville State game, Virginia game, both 48%. The Marshall game, 49%. Georgia Southern, 52%. Georgia State, 52%. Old Dominion game, 65%. Half the schedule is coin flip games. So it's, again, for that team that was sort of existing on that razor's edge and could go either way, there's some teams where you can feel pretty confident about where they're going to finish. This one is where you fall on Coastal Carolina before the season. It says more about you than it does Coastal Carolina, because this is the kind of team that forces you to make some situational assumptions. They're unknowable in advance, right? Like, is Vasco going to be, or Kim, are they going to be qualitatively near where McCall was a couple years ago, or in the limited time that we saw him last year? Are they going to improve that red zone offense? Are they going to keep getting turnovers, and or are they going to improve the yardage against on defense while keeping up the turnovers? That would lead to a jump up in defense. If they allow as many yards and they're not getting the turnovers, they are going to implode on defense. So both the offense and the defense could go either way. We have a whole lot of new people here. I think this just comes down to your read on Tim Beck. Mm-hmm. I'm not a fan. So
yeah, I'm not a fan either.
That's where I'm at. Yeah.
And again, usually teams that are top 20 in turnovers gained, usually a team that the following year you see a bit of a regression there. Correct. And that's where you think you see maybe that coin flip game that, again, could determine 5.5 or 5 wins or 6 wins. You usually end up losing that game on the coin flip. So Coastal, it's not that I have a strong opinion. It's more that I'm just like, I see myself being anti them. Georgia Southern, it was a team I liked last year going into the year, and a win total of 6. They got there early, needed 1 win to get over. They lose their last 5 down the stretch. They end up pushing the win total. This was a boomer bust offense, we'll call it, under Clay Helton. They were able to put up points with the best of them. They were top 10 in total plays. EPA was probably a little weighed down because of all the turnovers Davis Brin threw. He led the country in interceptions, 19 picks last year. But with that being said, there were a lot of weapons here on offense that could really hum. Jalen White, he ran for nearly 900 yards and 9 touchdowns. He's back. They bring back Burgess, who had more than 100 targets last season. They do need to replace Hood, but Burgess to me is real solid. Quarterback, Brin was someone I was high on going into last year. Obviously, the turnovers were a disaster. Don't have as strong of an opinion on J.C. French and David Dallas. Offensive line, elite last season. Do lose 2 starters, but I think that they should be fine there. Defense, all things considered, for a team like Georgia Southern that plays super fast, you usually think the defense is kind of screwed. They held up all right. I think they did a pretty decent job, all things considered. Top 5 in havoc. This was a defense that returns pretty much everyone a substance, and overall top 25 in returning production. So I think Georgia Southern, on paper, this should come together, but I can't seem to shake that end of season run from Clay Helton and make me wonder, maybe is there something like a bad brew going into the season where maybe Georgia Southern isn't the dark horse that I was maybe hoping for when I look at this roster. So Thor, how do you see the Eagles before we talk schedule?
Probably similar to how you're setting that up. I think I like Georgia Southern more than my numbers do. I'll say that in advance. And I do like the pieces. I think the defense is going to be actually salty this year. They have one absolute stud on that defense, a game record, Marquez Watson Trent, honorable mention All-American last year in the linebacking core. And then the defensive line was getting pushed around all last year, but all 4 of the starters returned. They added some depth guys there as well. You would assume that would get better. Secondary returns 3 starters. They're adding a couple transfers as well. So you have 8 total starters there, and then they also brought in some P4 transfers to augment things. I think the defense is going to be solid. And then you get rid of Davis Pickle Bryn, who you mentioned how many interceptions he threw. As a team, Georgia Southern tied Nebraska for the most turnovers in the entire FBS. So you think if you replace him, you get adequate quarterback play in that system where you're going to put up numbers, but you protect the ball a little bit better. All of a sudden, you can start to see a path to legitimate improvement there. But it's an unknown with the quarterback. We do know that whoever is playing quarterback, they're going to be working with the best set of skill players in the Sun Belt. Like the running backs are deep. The receiving core is super duper deep. We just don't know. We haven't seen much of J.C. French. We haven't seen much of David Does Dallas. And Dexter Williams. Will they go instead with the dark horse, the dual threat guy in that system? Who knows? That's where it's up in the air here. And then the other tough thing about them, I'll just do the transition into the schedule, is the schedule is tough. And this is another one where there's a lot of different coin flip games. You start with a very interesting home game against Boise State. Boise State might be the best team in the G5, certainly by talent.
Mm-hmm.
I have Georgia Southern in that game as 12.3-point underdogs, win expectancy of 13%. Boy, could you get this season on track real quick if you pick off Boise State coming across the country at home in that first week. You should get the next two with Nevada and South Carolina State. But then Ole Miss, and then we get, obviously, is going to be a loss, and then we get into a whole bunch of coin flip games. It's another one of those. Georgia State coin flip, Marshall coin flip, James Madison pretty close to a coin flip, Old Dominion coin flip, South Alabama, Troy, Coastal. They're all coin flip games.
Yeah.
So it's all going to come down to how good is that quarterback. But I do think that the defense is legitimately improved, and they have a monstrous amount of talent in the skill positions.
So I project Georgia Southern over this win total, actually, but again, this is my number saying, and then you got to go through and actually kind of put your, I don't just blindly bet my numbers, but I do project Georgia Southern. I'm at 6.2, so it's not some significant edge. But again, a lot of that is really coming down to decimals in how I view Old Dominion on the road, Georgia State on the road. Like, if a few of those games were at home, I feel much more comfortable betting over on Georgia Southern. You still got to go on the road. You're playing Georgia State, who is down this year for sure. You're playing them the week after Ole Miss, so it's not like you're getting a nice little run up to that when you might be a little beat up. So, again, you mentioned it, a lot of coin flips, and the quarterback play can quickly impress, and maybe I start playing on this team. But there's also a chance that there's a slower build to this one, and maybe Clay Helton's running through a few different guys to get to the right answer, and maybe that leads to a loss at Nevada or something, something early in the season where things get off to the wrong foot. He chooses wrong. So again, this is to me like a stay away, as are some of these in the Sun Belt.
This would be a stay away for me for sure. Yep.
So we stay in the state of Georgia. We talk Georgia State. Sean Elliott leaves. He takes a coordinator job after the spring. I believe it was South Carolina. A complete do-over for Del McGee. 127th in returning production on the offense side of the ball. Defense as well outside of top 100. So this is kind of a guess, we'll call it. McGee comes with Georgia ties, so there is a bit of a Georgia flair to this. We'll see who starts at quarterback. You got Christian Welix, who saw some time last year, or Zach Gibson. He comes from Georgia Tech and also Akron. There's just a lot of transfers here where you're trying to put things together. You don't know how it's going to stick. CJ Beasley's one to watch at running back from Coastal Carolina. Jordan Ford as well from Tulsa. I mean, wide receiver, they have Lewis, who transfers to Auburn. He's gone. I mean, Carroll, he's gone as well at running back. So a lot to question on the offense, the defense. Again, you're kind of just guessing on how this is going to look. They were a defense that was pretty stout last year, but they return outside the top 100 in returning production, like I said. So I think Georgia State win total 4.5. Tough to get excited, but again, maybe this is a team that clicks a little bit faster than to be expected. This is one where it's more of a guess than anything, I think, going into the season.
Yeah, this is one of the teams that's going to be falling back, of course. Last couple of years, and in particular last year, their offense was actually fun to watch. You know, you had Granger running around. You mentioned Lewis. He was super fun. And Marcus Carroll is good. Like Marcus, as I call him, Marcus Christmas Carroll, he's going to be playing in the NFL. And by the way, I think he beats out Nate Noel. It probably be some sort of timeshare there at Mizzou, but I think Carroll is the one that leads that. He was on, I drafted him onto I run this 50-team college fantasy football league, and I drafted him onto my team last year. And so I watched a lot of Georgia State and really liked that team. But you mentioned you have the veteran coach that leaves literally like the day before spring ball opens.
Yeah.
It was like, and for people out there, it's like the coaches in the intermediate weeks between the end of the regular season and then spring ball, they're all planning this stuff, they're roster building, and then they're planning out all their practices and stuff. And then the guy who's your boss and your leader, like the day before the thing opens, like you're getting all the kids ready. Hey, are you on campus? Make sure that you're in the building tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. And all of a sudden the coach is like, yeah, I'm out of here. I'm out. I'm going Columbia, right? He went to South Carolina.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's like, that was a kick in the what. And then Georgia State did something interesting with the coaching hire where if I was the AD there, I might have considered the thing of the 1-year stopgap guy just because of the circumstance, right? You don't want to do that, if you have the full coaching carousel window. But where they were, maybe for continuity, I would have either bumped someone up or else, Jim Grobe, for people out there that remember the Briles season where Baylor was like, oh, what do we do? Let's just bring Jim Grobe in to coach the team for a year. Might have done that. I like Del McGee long term. The guy's enthusiastic, players get behind him, very good recruiter. He also put together in very short order what I consider to be a very good coaching staff.
Yeah.
So long term, I think they're going to be able to get talent there. They're in a talent-rich place, and then they have the coaches there to build this thing back up. Year one, though, is going to be tough. You basically lose spring practices. Everyone running around with chickens with their head cut off. Del McGee is not, I like his potential, but he is not experienced in this role that he's in. And even though he did good with the coaching hires and trying to get everyone back on the same, and with the coordinators, I'm talking about Jim Chaney and Kevin Schurer. Chaney, he's going to go more towards the pass. In the past couple of years, again, particularly last year, you use the quarterback's legs quite a bit, and then the efficiency passes. And then, of course, the bell cow running back in Carroll last year. Velo from did he come from Penn State Pitt?
Penn State to Pitt, but he never played at Penn State. Penn State to Pitt to Georgia State.
And I believe, was Christian Velo the guy that Spencer Rattler was talking crap to back in the day on that QB1 show on Netflix, like in high school? That's
very possible. They should be the same age, or at least within a year of each other.
I'm pretty sure that he was, but he'll get a shot. They have the weirdest quarterback room. You have Velo, who has just sort of floated around college football looking for his opportunity, going against Zach Gibson. Zach Gibson had the worst decision I've ever seen on a college football field a couple of years ago, playing at the end of a game with Georgia Tech. It was a Hail Mary. They were down by like 4 points, and he ran out of bounds.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah.
And then they asked Zach Gibson after the game, like, it was the last play of the game, and you were down, like you had to get a touchdown. Why'd you run out of bounds? His response was incredible. He said, because no one was open. I'll never forget it. Zach Gibson,
ultimate throwing under the bus there.
Yeah, it was like, bro, they're in a prevent. It's the whole point of a Hail Mary is you just toss the thing up and you pray. That's why they call it Hail Mary. However, Zach Gibson, he stunk his last couple of years, like made a bad transfer portal decision. He showed something at Akron prior to that. I don't know if he has anything left. That might just be a stick a fork in it. But the whole point being, they need one of those two guys to be not a star, but they need him to be competent. Chaney throws, right? So the system is changing from quarterback runs. And then we have the bell cow running back. And then when we're passing, we're trying to do the quick hit and stuff when you're stacking the box against us, to now it's going to go slant more towards a pro style type passing system. They need one of those guys, but they've lost so much talent outside the quarterback position. You mentioned Robert Lewis. Robert Lewis is a keeper. They've lost their top receiver in consecutive seasons. Remember the year before it was Jamari Thrash going to play with Jeff Brom. And then on defense, Jontre Hunter, who is not athletic, as we found out during the pre-draft process, but he's very good at getting after the quarterback. They're losing that. One of their biggest disruptive defenders as well. With all this stuff up in the air, obviously I'm not behind Georgia State this year. I'm probably lower on them than my win total is. My win total for them is 4.36.
Yeah, it's a tough schedule, especially because you could question the depth as well. So Georgia State, one of the teams that gets screwed by the double bye. They play 3 games to start. They will likely win against Chattanooga. They get a bye in week 4. They host Georgia Southern, and then it's another bye before they close with 8 straight games that feature 4 straight road games, 2 of which are on weeknights, Thursday at Marshall and Friday at UConn. So it's a pretty brutal schedule for Del McGee. I think we could chalk this one up as a mulligan year 0 type situation for the Panthers. A team that's also doing a full do-over. We were talking earlier about coaching changes, teams on the rise, teams on the fall. James Madison, Kurt Cignetti doesn't just take the job at Indiana. He basically takes the entire James Madison roster and brings them to Bloomington. So what's left? Transfer-heavy roster for head coach Bob Chesney, who takes over. Dylan Morris comes in from Washington. Ayo Adaye comes from North Texas. He's a former 1,000-yard rusher. Petaway, a highly touted recruit from North Carolina, he comes in. Chesney comes from Holy Cross. He brings his quarterback Purdy, more of a dual threat type, nearly rushed for 1,000 yards last year. Obviously, taking a step up in class. Receivers, they lose their top 3, though. Offensive line, probably the only source of continuity on this offense. 3 starters return. So we'll see how that goes. But again, this is a James Madison team that was thought of during the last season as a New Year's Six type, or they were trying to petition for a New Year's Six bowl. And then, of course, they immediately lose upon the petition going out to the NCAA. So a lot of turnover on offense, defense as well. Outside top 100 in returning production, they lose guys like Carpenter, Kamara. They're going to be counting on some changes here. So we'll see. Thor, the one saving grace for the Dukes, though, is a relatively easy schedule. That's probably why the win total is propped up at 8.5, shaded towards the under. Do you see a drop-off for James Madison? Do you think this is kind of a place where it's talent-rich, there's a new coach, but still some sort of stability that they could still win 9-10 games?
James Madison is a tough one for me because, they just lost so freaking much. Cignetti, the 3 coordinators, the quarterback in McLeod, and then a whole bunch of other dudes, right? Just sort of up and down the roster. So that happens. I do like Chesney, though. And the offensive system there, Holy Cross, they had a whole bunch of guys who got picked off in the portal, not just following Chesney, but their quarterback is projected to start somewhere else in the G5. It'll come back to me. But they had guys dotted all over the place. They were more qualitatively, they wouldn't have even been in the bottom of the G5 last year if Holy Cross had been in it. They're better than a series of them. And that's where Chesney comes from. Like that hire. But they're going to be down only 7 total returning starters. And in the returning production metrics, 123rd. So I'm all geared up to be anti-James Madison after the last couple of years and ready to bet the under. It's just, the schedule is an abomination. I'm looking. So I have a strength of schedule metric that, the strength of schedule ones that I hate. And for anyone out there, this is probably the most valuable information you'll get, at least from me on this show. Some of the people that do the strength of schedule where it's last year record, it's absolutely worthless.
There's nothing worse.
It's so stupid adding those up. It would be maybe more accurate in the NFL, but even that would be stupid because at least the teams are grouped closer together. In college football, it's absolutely trash. My strength of schedule metric, it averages out the power rankings of all 12 opponents. So, and currently, right, like in this moment, at least how I see them and my numbers see them. With that said, James Madison's strength of schedule for this coming year, 121st out of 134. They are right dang near their at the, depending on how you want to see it, the top or the bottom of the FBS. Certainly facilitates a quick start for Chesney, even with this remade roster. Now, this is another one where you're going to have to, this one, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to the coach. Even doing it quickly, he's done it quickly at his previous stops, even if it wasn't the FBS. On this team, you have to make the situational assumptions about the players. Dylan Morris would be front and center in that. Dylan Morris in another sliding doors reality. DeBoer goes to Washington. Let's say Michael Penix during his draft process, we got more of an insight into his transferring and that decision and stuff like that. There was a couple teams that had a real shot at Michael Penix when he was leaving Indiana, and they fumbled the bag. And so that's like, people out there probably, especially NFL fans that don't know college, they probably just think it was automatic. Oh, Penix leaves. Of course, he's going to go with his former coach, DeBoer, at Washington. It actually wasn't that. He actually was listening to all the different pitches. And initially, there was a couple of schools that he wanted to go to a little bit more. Maybe let's try out the SEC, for instance. But those schools fumbled the bag. So he goes to Washington. But just say in this sliding door reality that one of those schools that he initially liked more, they did a good job recruiting him. They get Michael Penix in the door. Would we have seen Dylan Morris as a top NFL prospect at this point, working with everyone that Michael Penix was working with in the DeBoer system? He was a top recruit. He certainly waited his turn at Washington, and then he ends up booking it out when they did the coaching staff change. Is Dylan Morris good? That is going to depend on, is James Madison win double digits this year? If Dylan Morris is good, I actually think that they will, against the schedule that they're playing, which again, it lines up really well. For where I see James Madison, my own win total was pretty stunning to me. But when you start looking down that schedule, less so. I have James Madison at 9.25 wins this fall.
So James Madison, to dumb the schedule down as much as possible, James Madison will play 2 teams with a win total of that is expecting bowl eligibility. So they will play 2 teams that are projected to win 6 or more games with a win total of 6.5 or more. They play at North Carolina in week 4. They also get a bye before that one. And they play at Appalachian State in week 13 in a game that might actually decide who goes to the Sun Belt Championship game. Who knows? I agree with you. Again, it's not one I'm necessarily rushing to bet because, again, there are questions and there's also not a lot of margin for error. So even like a few slip-ups, you're really in some trouble here. So James Madison to me is a team I'm staying away from. I'm watching with a keen eye. I'll just say I bet Charlotte in week 1 against them on the road because I think that could be maybe a slow burn. I think Charlotte has enough continuity and athleticism that can
what's the spread on that?
That I think it's now 8.5, but I bet 9.5.
Okay. Yeah, Charlotte's kind of interesting. You go to the bottom because I love the Max Brown signing, and then Cartavius Norton and is it Stokes, the kid from Michigan? I mean, we don't have time to get into Charlotte, but Pogge, I'm just so fascinated by Ben Pogge. Yeah.
That's why I like that Charlotte could be like a sneaky underdog money line. Like that's a game where there might be a little bit more variance, and like James Madison, it's a little too much like priors weighing into that number. So there's another bet that we could give out here, but it's also worth noting though, if Morris is to go down, there's zero depth behind him. There's really no one of substance that could back him up. And again, that's a little concerning when the win total is implying they're going to win 9 games or you need 9 wins to go over, because what if he gets hurt? You don't have like a capable backup that could at least like get you through some easy games. It might be a serious drop off. So JMU, easy schedule, but I wish it was going to a team that had a little bit more continuity. A team that many are pegging as making another leap up. It's Louisiana, team I was down on going into last year. They actually looked great. A lot of injuries on offense. They find a quarterback. That quarterback gets hurt. They end up back at the end with their guy Chandler Fields. He's back. This offense was 21st in EPA per play. So I always butcher his name, but Coach Demew is sorry. I always butcher the name. Maybe he has a system here building. They were 15th in line yards. They returned 4 starters on the offensive line. Defense, bend don't break. They were really strong at keeping the opposition in front of them. They were great. Top third of the country in both explosive rush and pass rate. Top 50 in returning production on that side of the ball. Good pass rush. They returned 3 starters and they land Mims from Ball State, worth noting, 320-pounder. So maybe a run stuffer there as well. So listen, I think Louisiana could be better this year. So does the market. Win total of 7.5 for the Raging Cajuns. So Thor, too much too soon? Or do you think maybe Chandler Fields could stay healthy, stay on the field, and this team could be back in the Sun Belt mix after Billy Napier left?
Yeah, Louisiana 6-7 last 2 years under. I think it's pronounced Desmoreau, but
I'm probably wrong. I lean towards wrong, so I trust you there.
Those French, the Cajun French names there, they can be tough. I'm gonna have to ask my buddy.
That's my Northeast charm coming through the microphone.
Yeah, my buddy Derek Brown, my former colleague, he lives down in Cajun country, so I'll ask him for it. But you go 6-7 for 2 straight years, and I didn't love that hire of I'm going to call him Desmoreau Desmoreau.
You're right. You're definitely right.
When he got hired. However, and it's weird because it's like 6-7, big fall off from Napier, and then it's another 6-7, and you'd think you'd be like, well, I didn't like it initially, and now it's 2 6-7 seasons. I'm totally out. He and that staff actually proved something to me last year. This is another team I watch probably closer than the average. Obviously I cover all of them, but I ended up with Ben Woolridge in that 50-team league, and so I was monitoring Louisiana every single week. Louisiana had this biblical rash of injuries in the quarterback room to where that team really should have thrown in the towel, but they fought to bowl eligibility to finish 6-7. So I actually thought last year's 6-7 was actually somewhat impressive. And the quarterbacks that they had they were all different from each other. And the shifts in the offense that you could see, to me, it was impressive. It showed an aptitude for building the week in, week out game plan and scheme around the personnel that is running it, which people out there, they might be like, oh, that's common sense. Way less common than you would think in the even in the program, but in the college game, certainly you'll see a lot of guys are just like, no, you must fit into my scheme or else you're on the bench. And they weren't like that this year. So, last year they had to close out with the QB3 on that team, play a lot of the season with it. The offense still averaged 32 points per game last year. Even with that, even the biblical plague of injuries, certainly going to be better this year. I mean, could they 35? Could they get over 35 a game? I think it's in play. You return 7 starters on offense, 15th most production overall in the country, 30th on offense. And at this point, you have 2, in my mind, proven starter guys to compete for the job. And then if you get the one injury, you still have a starting caliber guy in. I don't see much difference qualitatively between Chandler Rogers and Ben Woolridge. I like both those guys. And I don't care that Zion Chris went to be a backup in the P4 this year. If I was them, I would have said, thank you for your service. Goodbye. Fields and Woolridge is just fine there. And then on defense, they run the 3-4. You bring back, I mentioned 26 returning production on defense, 8 returning starters. Did a really good job of augmenting the depth there over the season in the portal. So now I feel like they have a legitimate 2 deep on the defensive side of the ball. They also brought in a new defensive coordinator, Jim Salgado, former NFL assistant, specializes specifically in the secondary, a group that needed to get better. He probably will make it better. The other super sneaky thing about Louisiana, they play awesome special teams. They've had top 10 special teams unit each of the last 2 years nationally. Yep. So you project improvement on offense. You're going to get that for sure. You almost assuredly will get it on defense. They have more defensive production returning than almost any team in the nation. And I like the defensive coordinator. And they have an awesome special teams. And folks, that's not all. They play a crappy schedule. Yep. 106th in the nation in my metrics. So you add up all this stuff. My system, 8.5 wins for Louisiana. The Raging Cajuns are back this year.
Yeah, I lean towards the over as well. We go through that schedule. There are some layups on it. Grambling State to open. At Kennesaw, new to the FBS, they are on it. They do host Tulane. I'll call that game a coin flip. I think it's a winnable game for the Raging Cajuns, especially at home. Go to Wake Forest. If you're going to play an FBS team, Wake is a Power 4 team. Wake is surely one of those teams you want to face. At Southern Miss, also after that. They do host Appalachian State, but they go to Coastal the following week. They get a bye before they host Texas State. That's likely a massive windfall for them and something that could surely define their conference, their division rather, and who could go to the Sun Belt. You close, I mean, sure, Arkansas State, South Alabama, Troy are in like that middle tier this year. All of those games are at home, all in successive weeks, and then they close at ULM, who we're going to talk about in a second. So, yes, I agree. The runway is there for the Raging Cajun to definitely contend for the Sun Belt title. I still think we're not all the way yet of who we think is going to win the Sun Belt. I think I'm starting to figure out who you like, and I think you could probably feel the same way about me. But yes, the Raging Cajun are, in my opinion, are pushing up and up on the come up here in the Sun Belt.
1,000%. Yeah. And you mentioned the schedule. You got the 2 wins to start it off. I see both Tulane and Wake Forest as coin flips. I also see Appalachian State as a coin flip because you get them at home. All 3 of those games, my win expectancy for Louisiana is either 50 or 51%. So we're talking true coin flip games. The Texas State game is going to be tough traveling there, of course, but yeah. you have a lot of winnable games on this schedule. And the other important thing is you don't have any of those for sure loss games, right? I mean, you mentioned Wake Forest being the 1P4 team, and I got that as a coin flip. Wake Forest was not very good last year. They're probably not going to be very good this year. Louisiana in this wide open Sun Belt, they're one of those teams you put on the short list of could potentially make that conference title game.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it also helps, like, again, at the end of the season, South Alabama, Troy, like, what if they're much worse than expected? Like, those games, like, let's say we're going to set a game of the year market line now. You're maybe a little bit closer, like ULL minus 3.5, like small favorite, like a closer to a coin toss than like a confident win. We might get to that game in week 12 against South Alabama, and Louisiana might be, I won't go drastic, but they could be favored by more than a touchdown or something like that because South Alabama is that much worse. I'll go within reason. So there is, if you're buying into the upside, there is some reason. For what it's worth, I project Louisiana to win 7.8 games, so I would lean towards the over as well. Maybe not as confident as Thor. A team, I think we can motor through this one pretty fast. Louisiana-Monroe, they fired Terry Bowden. They hired Brian Vincent, comes former OC at UAB in New Mexico. It was a terrible offense last year. They only returned 2 starters. The name to know if you follow random college football meme accounts, General Booty comes in from Oklahoma. He's going to compete for the starting job. Running backs, they lose a handful there. It's top 7 pass catchers all gone, only 1 starter on the line. Defense, a little bit more, but it's worth noting they lose their best pass rusher in Aiden Huntington. He transfers out. They lose their top 3 tacklers. So it's a complete do-over here. I think that they're not going to be favored in any game this year. The win total is 2.5 shade towards the under. Now, they're going to be favored over Jackson State. That's it. After that, I don't see them as a favorite in any game. Maybe Southern Miss at home, but ultimately to me, I don't have much to say, and I think it's probably going to be a year 0 type situation here. Do you see anything to get excited about for the Warhawks this year?
I don't think that their administration or their fan base does. This is a school and a program that does not appear to take being in the FBS seriously. I would love a relegation system someday to get rid of UL-Monroe, Temple, a couple of these other ones that just clearly don't care. And let's get a couple of those Dakota teams in there, or Montana, the Montana State, yada, yada. UL-Monroe, so they fired Terry Bowden, and there's so many different directions you could go with you try to get the good recruiter, you try to get the good X's and O's guy, all this stuff. They didn't do any of it. Brian Vincent, I thought, was one of the least inspiring hires of the offseason. And it's like, oh, well, it's just UL-Monroe. But you know how many FCS guys that are like, the strategists and the X's and O's guys, the mad scientists, would have killed to have this opportunity? I didn't understand that. A brief history lesson for people out there. Brian Vincent was an assistant under Bill Clark. Bill Clark, the guy that took UAB from the literal dead. They were dead for 2 years as a program and immediately brought them back to however many bowls it was before he stepped away. And when he unexpectedly stepped away prior to, 2 seasons ago, they did the interim thing that I was talking about before, elevated Vincent. He had one super duper uninspiring season there, but the players loved him. And so they were lobbying the administration, like sending letters in, visiting the office, everything like that. And UAB went with Trent Dilfer, a guy that had never coached before in the college ranks. They didn't want Brian Vincent. And so Brian Vincent last year was OC. Was it New Mexico? I think it was.
Yeah, he was OC in New Mexico.
Yeah. outside of his players liking him and outside of being associated with Bill Clark, I don't know what in the recent past you can point to of Brian Vincent to be like, oh, let's put him at the longest shot odds program in the FBS, and he might be able to make them frisky. I don't know what you can point to. His system or his strategy in games is ludicrously antiquated. It's just run the ball, drain the play clock, meander back to the line, out of the huddle, run another time. Oh, it's third down. It's 3rd and 5. Now we have to call a pass play. Like, that's what his whole thing is. It doesn't work at a school like this. You need to either be unearthing recruits, doing something different in recruiting in this sort of Wild West paradigm that we found ourselves in to try to raise a team like this off the mat, or be doing it on the field schematically, right? Jamie Chadwell, when he went to Coastal Carolina, bringing that the spread offense system in that had some of the passing. It was like an offshoot of what Rodriguez used to do, but you add more passing into it. Stuff like that. Do different stuff. Chesney's going to do different stuff this coming season. We know that Brian Vincent won't. He ran the offenses for all them years at UAB, was in charge of the decisions the year that he was interim. Last year at New Mexico, it's the same thing every year. His offenses are always one of the slowest paced in the nation. They slant heavily towards the run game. So this team here, you have to be able to play some defense to be able to play that way. 125th returning production on defense, on a defense that was terrible last year, and only 2 returning starters on offense. With the defense, the opposing defense are going to know what's coming every single time. And then the dude the Hunter Smith is their running back who's returning. And you could be like, well, okay, he likes to run a lot. And Hunter Smith, you look down the roster, he's actually one of the better returning players. Here's the issue there. Hunter Smith's 181 pounds. This Vincent guy, if he had his druthers, would run his lead back 25 times a game. That's what he always did at UAB and et cetera, et cetera. That kid is not going to be able to handle it. Here's my prediction. Hunter Smith gets injured in late September, early October. Now they lose one of their best offensive players. They find out the defense stinks. And I think that they're going to have like an offensive identity crisis somewhere late October, early November. I think that this one is going to end in disaster.
Yeah. It's going to be, again, win total 2.5 shade towards the under. It's not high expectations. They could still get worse there.
I got 1.4 on them. I'm showing legitimate value to the under on UL-Monroe.
Favored in one game this year, and that's week 1 against Jackson State.
A game they could lose, by the way.
One of the better FCS teams. We move on to Marshall, a team that was once thought of as the top dogs in the Sun Belt, has taken a real hit here. Offense was really bad last year behind a really bad offensive line. Cam Fancher transfers out. They bring in Mitch Griffiths in the spring, so maybe he doesn't win the job early, and maybe it's Cole Pennington or Tulsa transfer Braylon Braxton. They lose Rasheen Ali. They lose Harrison, who goes to Notre Dame at wide receiver. So some turnover in terms of stars. They get Houston from North Carolina State at running back, but I think that offensive line returns only 2 starters. New O-line coach can maybe revamp this offense. That I think Fancher wasn't good, but neither was the offensive line. I think it was just a house of horrors for them. What they did have, though, was an elite defense. They let up a lot of explosive, but really good at forcing havoc. Outside top 100 in returning production, though. So, again, this is one of these teams where there's a lot of question marks as to where Marshall's going. And I think there is a scenario where Charles Huff is losing this team and Marshall's kind of the arrows pointing down on the thundering herd. We'll see how it goes. I'll talk about schedule in a sec, but Thor, how do you see Marshall this season?
This is a very strange program. When Huff took over, he did really well initially, and it's like, and they had a defined identity, right? I mean, this is a team because you have access to more talent. You can get the better offensive lines. You can get the better running back and the defensive-minded ethos. So this is one where you could do closer to that Brian Vincent scheme that I was just crapping on. And that was more or less what it was. It's just run, run, run. The year where Rasheen Ali decided to take the season off, LeBourne came in and he was awesome. It was plug and play for the running backs. Last year, so Ali comes back and he was okay. The offensive line was terrible. Cam Fancher, he runs around, but he makes boneheaded decisions. Don't get me started. I don't know why Tom Herman signed him. I'm not super high on FAU this year either. But Marshall did something so bizarre this offseason, coming off a head-scratching end of the season. So last year they start 4-0. And so it's like, oh, the momentum, they're keeping it going, and it's going to be great. And they finished 6-7. So they just totally so it's 2-7 the last 9 games. They fall off there, and then Ollie leaves, and they're like, well, Huff must have decided, like, and it seems like he had some heat on him. They fired some of the assistants. He threw some of them under the bus, and that's fine. But he entirely changed the direction of the team, the ethos of the team, the offensive strategy of the team by bringing in Seth Doege. So Seth Doege, of course, like the former Texas Tech quarterback under Mike Leach, he's an air raid guy. So Marshall decides to go from the 3 yards in a cloud of dust thing to the air raid. You sign Mitch Griffiths, who did nothing at Wake Forest, in a system where Sam Hartman, who has a noodle for an arm and makes wonky decisions, where he was setting all these records. Mitch Griffiths couldn't run it, but now it's like, okay, Mitch Griffiths is going to be our air raid quarterback. Then he retired. Mitch Griffiths from the sport walks away during the spring. He retires on LinkedIn. He puts his announcement on LinkedIn. What are we doing with any of this? Now you have Cole Pennington, who was awful last year in his limited playing time. I believe he had a 0-6 TDI&T rate. We did get to see him.
He was awful.
He was terrible.
You couldn't move the ball with him.
They tried to bench Fancher, and they couldn't, because Cole it was like, at least Fancher runs around. He also turns the ball over just like Cole, but Cole can't run around. So the quarterback battle, you got Pennington, who stinks, and he's confined to the pocket. And then Braylon Braxton, who's a very, very good athlete, comes over from Tulsa. Tulsa wanted Braylon Braxton to be their starter, but he wasn't capable of keeping that job because of his boneheaded mistakes as well. But he's basically your new Fancher. I probably would have preferred Fancher to Braylon Braxton, who couldn't stay on the field at Tulsa. Either way, the quarterbacks stink. They're moving into an air raid system. The one thing they were doing good offensively the past couple of years, they have entirely scrapped it, that run game. Of course, they don't have the running backs that they had. And then on defense, you go from that system where you're bleeding the play clock, you're controlling the ball, and now you're going to an air raid that I don't think is going to be very good. They don't have great receiving talent either. I don't know how this one's going to work out. I mean, defensive regression could come just from having to be on the field more, not having the depth on that side of the ball. They're only 118th in returning defensive production. To me, the decisions that Charles Huff made over the offseason reeked of desperation. One of them is already blown up in his face. This is a guy who quietly enters the season on the hot seat. Yeah. If we get a 4-8, I think Charles Huff could get fired. And I actually like the guy. Like, I think his players like him. He had success prior to this year. Would it be fair? I'm not sure. But you have an entire offseason to remake your roster. You can do that in the modern day of college football. I think he chose wrong on a series of situational decisions he made. My over-under, my adjusted win total for Marshall is 5.42. I would definitely, if you said, what do you think are the better odds, under 500 or 6-6 or better in the regular season? I would definitely go under 500. I think that this could easily be a 4-8 season that is the end of Charles Huff in Marshall.
Yeah, my win total for Marshall is 5.2. And I will say I've adjusted Marshall down, but it's worth noting the schedule is fairly forgiving. They do draw ULM at home. They draw Georgia State at home, Stony Brook, an FCS team, Western Michigan at home. So, 4 wins right there with Coastal also at home. And then there's also ODU and Southern Miss on the road. So there are winnable games, but I just don't trust the talent here. So yeah, Marshall, it's a stay away from me. Team that was the bane of my existence last year, played in, including the bowl game, played in 10 one-score games. Old Dominion, elite defense last year. Despite only having 15 sacks, this is a team that was 28th in EPA per play, an amazing run defense. It made up for a pretty mediocre offense. They were 116th in net success rate. while they return Wilson and they land Emmett Moorhead from Boston College, they are 86th in returning production. So we'll see. They lose their top receiver. Murphy. The offense only has 2 starters back. So I think that the offense, it was mediocre to bad last year. It's probably going in the wrong direction this year. The defense, again, without pressure, managed to be amazing, but out to the top 100 in defensive returning production. So I do question if this team could keep it up. I will note, though, Henderson is back at linebacker. He missed all of last season after being an All-American in 2022. So that's an exciting return for them. But that's pretty much the only thing that's really exciting about this team going into this year. Thor, what are your thoughts on ODU?
They really need Henderson to be healthy. Yeah. Jason Henderson, All-American, coming off the ACL. Will he be ready for the season? That is an open-ended question right now. It's a totally different defense when Henderson's not on the field. Henderson will be a longtime player in the NFL. Last 2 years, even though he didn't complete the last one with that injury, 350 tackles, more than 350 tackles, and 34 and a half tackles for loss. And that wasn't in a full complement of games again. So the defense is going to be way better if he's on the field. If it's not, it is going to regress. We know that. I like Ricky Ron as an offensive coach. He did a good job at Penn State, probably the best offensive coordinator they've had there in a while. We'll see if Kolanecki can pass him this year. He and Ron did make bowls 2 of the last 3 seasons. Impressive turnaround job at ODU. But you mentioned that they got to sort that out. Are they going to stay with Grant Wilson? He was like okay-ish last year.
He was fine.
Yeah. Not a needle mover, but he could, was the caretaker of the offense. Or are you going to go with Emmett Moorhead? We'll see there. They have a couple of P4 transfers that are going to platoon at running back. No stars in the receiver room, but they do have a bunch of bodies there. The offensive line will be interesting to keep an eye on because they signed a bunch of transfers that they need to play immediately. I like the staff here. I don't like the returning talent and the question of Henderson's availability there, which again would change if he's 100% right away. I have Old Dominion taking a bit of a step back this year to 3.5 wins. And a part of that is the schedule. Yeah. We've talked about some just horrid schedules in the Sun Belt. I have Old Dominion nationally as the 71st schedule, which I haven't stacked the Sun Belt teams is going to be right up there at the top of the Sun Belt, maybe even the toughest schedule in the Sun Belt. Playing that gauntlet when you don't have the needle movers outside of Henderson. Again, Henderson's availability, what is it going to be? That's where the issue is for Old Dominion this season.
Yeah, going through the schedule, it's really what's driven me to bet the under on the win total. You can make an argument that they're going to play 10 bowl teams, depending on how the season shakes out. 0 gimme games on the schedule, considering their easiest game is, we'd say, at Georgia State. That's their most likely win, and that's on the road. And it also comes after back 2 straight road games prior to that. So to run through the schedule quickly, it's at South Carolina, East Carolina at home, so maybe that's a win. Virginia Tech, at Bowling Green, at Coastal, at Georgia State. So there's your other win potentially. Home Texas State, home Georgia Southern on a short week. Then at App State, by James Madison, home Marshall, at Arkansas State. I mean, the win total is 4.5. It shades towards the under, but you can make an argument we're seeing 3s more than 4s with this schedule. So ODU, especially a team that, again, they went 5-4 in 1-score games in the regular season last year. So I think that we see some regression there, and maybe the bottom falls out on the Monarchs. So ODU under 4.5 for me. That's a bet. We're coming down the home stretch here. South Alabama, big changes here. Kane Womack did a great job in Mobile. He takes the job at Alabama to be a co-defensive coordinator. In comes Major Applewhite. Thor, maybe you've seen updates here, but I see a quarterback competition between Lopez and Davenport. I mean, this is a real new offense here. 120th in returning production. They lose guys like Webb. They do bring back McReynolds at running back. He figures to be part of the running back room. They lose Lacey, but they do bring Voisin back at wide receiver. Offense, though, lose 4 starters, so lose a lot there as well. Like I mentioned, 120th in returning production. You could say similar about the defense. Really good last year. Top 30 in EPA per play. Their defensive coordinator is at the DC at Alabama. So you can imagine what happened here. 120th in returning production. Counting on depth to really make this work, but they lose all their starters at linebacker. I would say the secondary is a point of strength, but again, South Alabama, the win total is 6.5, but I could see this go. Like, this is one of the teams where you could see this going in a myriad of different directions. Do you have a strong opinion?
Yeah, I'm out on South Alabama this year. You lose Womack, one of the best coaches in the G5. That was a master stroke by DeBoer to get him there to run the defense. And then they made, I called the Brian Vincent hire uninspiring. The Major Applewhite hire was just flat stupid. I think they did that, in part for you have continuity because he was the OC before. And then you also, he has head coaching experience in the past. But to me, South Alabama had more offensive talent than they had offensive production the past couple of years. I mean, that was a team that had legitimate players, running back, certainly receivers. The NFL has taken multiple of them to the next level. And, it was what it was. Major Applewhite at Houston, he came in after Tom Herman had just dominated there. And it started to nosedive on Major Applewhite right away. I think he only made it 2 seasons. I distinctly remember shouting match between him and Ed Oliver on the sidelines of a Thursday night game at Houston. He did not seem to have control of that team. I know the narrative there is, I've learned from my mistakes and I'm a better coach now, yada, yada. I don't buy it. I think it was a mistake. The thing that I like about the roster, they still have good receivers and they have a good secondary too. So some of that athleticism remains, but they just lost so much in terms of the personnel. 114th in returning production, 110th or worse on both offense and defense. You mentioned the quarterback battle. I think Lopez wins it. He's the redshirt freshman, and you don't have as much talent around him. I don't like Applewhite, and the defense is certainly going to be worse this year. So I'm definitely out on South Alabama. My win total for them, let me check real quick, is I got them at 5.8 wins for South Alabama. But I think they miss a bowl game this year.
Yeah, it could be a year 0 type situation. What's interesting though is the win total market shades towards over 6.5. So, and you can look at the schedule and say, okay, like maybe this comes together. They are favored by more than a touchdown against North Texas in week 1. They play a revamped Ohio team in week 2. They get FCS Northwestern State in week 3. After that, though, it's 3 straight road games, and the third is the winnable one at Arkansas State. So you're getting a bad break there. Come out of a bye, you host Troy, you host ULM back-to-back, and you host Georgia Southern. So maybe you could build up some momentum there out of a bye week. At Southern Miss, really the only other game you could get. A lot of coin flips there for a team that's 7 wins. It's a lot. You're kind of winning a lot of coin flips for a team that doesn't have a lot back. So South Alabama, question mark. The last truly bad team we're going to talk about before we get out of here is Southern Mississippi. The bottom seems to fall out here. They are bottom 10 in returning production. They are likely counting on Tate Rodemaker, who you will remember if you followed Florida State last year. He was dubbed the guy who had to step in for Jordan Travis to try and save everything. The ACC championship winning quarterback there. But that's pretty much it of talent. They lose their top 2 receivers. Offensive line loses 4 starters. So, I mean, where you're looking everywhere, there's new faces here. This was an aggressive defense under Will Hall, but also one of the worst defenses under Will Hall. There's not much coming back here, and there's a new DC trying to change the scheme. Clay Bignell takes over, trying to run a 4-2-5. Just tough to expect much here. I don't like the scheme change. Win total 4.5. I guess you could say there's a few winnable games on the schedule, but tough to see much here. I don't have much to say. If I had to say anything, it would probably be that this team maybe is playing in higher scoring games than expected because the defense might really struggle, and maybe Rodemaker makes a jump with a new, like a drop down in talent level. But ultimately, Southern Miss is like a no touch for me. I have no interest really.
Yeah, this is, of the bad teams in the Sun Belt, I do think this is one where there's a slightly higher band of outcomes here because Will Hall, I expected him to get fired after last year. It was the second, 3-9 finish of his 3-year tenure. Saves his job in part by having what was a good high school - portal class, in particular the high school class. So he's able to save himself So it's basically it's a 1-year trial run. It could go one way where he gets fired early and then they're trying to play some of the younger guys, and this is just a total train wreck of a season. Or it could kind of start to go the other way, depending on if some of those new additions play better. But you lose Frank Gore Jr., who was the sort of the heartbeat of the team the last couple of years. And the reason they stranded Frank Gore on that team was because the quarterback play was awful. And they also had injuries in it, each year. They've been down to like their fifth quarterback in some of these different years. Rodemaker, I don't like Rodemaker like as a player. I was very vocal about the fact that Florida State, you can look yourselves in the mirror for why you weren't in the playoff. You ought to have signed a veteran backup in the portal, like a guy like Colin Schley. If they, a guy like Colin Schley, they actually might have been able to make the argument of, oh no, we should be in the playoff. But they go with Rodemaker. Rodemaker stinks. However, Rodemaker will certainly be an objective upgrade over what Southern Miss has had, which is way worse than stinking. It was sub FBS caliber play, at times even sub FCS caliber quarterback play. So you are going to get the upgrade there, and then the running back taking over for Gore, Drake Clark of Memphis from before is pretty solid. They should be able to run the ball a little bit. The pass catchers, big question for me. They're basically banking on some former hyped recruits that did not play before to come in and immediately produce. How will that go? A big one, Larry Simmons from Ole Miss, was a high 4-star recruit a couple years ago, played 0 snaps last couple years at Ole Miss. So he going to Southern Miss, they have this hollowed out receiving core. Can a guy like that, or a couple of these other ones that they signed, can they immediately produce? They're going to have to, or Rodemaker is going to be sort of stranded. I like Southern Miss's secondary. Defensive line's okay.
Yeah.
I have no idea about the linebacking core whatsoever. They do have more returning production on defense than on offense, certainly. But to me, this one could go one way or the other. My win total probably splits the baby on that. 3.68 wins for Southern Miss.
Yeah, you would probably be going closer to, the under's minus 170, under 4.5. So that probably comes in around your outcomes. But that's where we're leaning. So we get to Texas State. GJ Kinney, pretty successful first year, I'd say. His first game, they upset Big 12 foe Baylor. The team is pretty stacked, I'd say. I know you mentioned at the top Boise State. You think that they are the best team in the group of 5. I would venture to argue that this is the best team in the group of 5. I think that there is cause to believe that this team can go to the college football playoff. They return 9 starters, and they are turning from TJ Finley at quarterback to the guy who won Sun Belt Player of the Year last year, James Madison, Jordan McLeod, backing him up as Jay and Delora, which doesn't hurt. They bring back Mahidi, who averaged 6 yards per play. And while they need to replace Hawkins, they get their next top 2 receivers back. So there's plenty of transfers here. Jaden Williams from Boston College, Bo Sparks from Utah Tech, transfers on the offensive line. But I think there's plenty still there to think that this offense can be top 20 in line yards yet again. They did allow a lot of tackles for loss, but I wonder if that part of that's TJ Finley related. Part of that is maybe a new system that GJ Kinney was running. Maybe year 2 it clicks. We see that a lot. Defense, boom or bust. They are absolutely nasty at getting in the backfield. Top 15 in sacks, second in tackles for loss, but they were carved up on explosive plays, so that's worth noting. They returned 9 starters, and they promoted from within to Dexter McCoyle at defensive line. Return a bunch here, and they get some high-end transfers like Adele, definitely butcher that one, from Michigan State, and Parker from Incarnate Word. So all that to say, I think Texas State is stacked, Thor. I think they're the best team in the Sun Belt. I think they should be favored over Appalachian State. Am I looking here the wrong way, or is there cause to be excited about this team? Because the schedule, I know we mentioned earlier they play at Louisiana, but there's also a world they're undefeated before that game because they host UTSA and they host Arizona State too. I think they might end up being favored in at least one of them. I think both. I think CFP is the ceiling for this team.
I agree. Yeah. Texas. So I do have to correct myself. Earlier, I said Appalachian State would play the team that I favor for the Sun Belt title. They actually don't play during the regular season. I just invented that. I think I'm already placing them in the Sun Belt title game. And that's of benefit to Texas State to avoid Appalachian State during the regular season. Certainly, I love this team. I'm with you. Last year the offense was super duper explosive, and they upgraded a quarterback.
Yeah.
I think you can absolutely make the argument that McLeod is a better passer than TJ Finley. Certainly provides a metric ton more value with the legs. And you think about the coaching staff he's going to, one of the more creative offensive play calling staffs that we have in the entire nation. There is a compounding factor to the value added with the legs in that sort of environment, right? The creativity that the staff can have. Now you can get the quarterback on the perimeter whenever you want. You have not only, so Mahdi is like a three facet killer. You know, and a find for them in the transfer portal in year one. The running, certainly, he is a great receiver and he is a dominant returner. And so he hurts you in all these different ways. They had an under the radar signing that I love too. They signed UTEP's Deion Hankins. The people in El Paso called Hankins Deion Tankins. He is your big hammer back.
Yeah.
Mahdi's the guy who you get out into space, right? Like he's the outside the tackle guy, the stretch concept guy, the pitch guy, and then the throw it, to him kind of a guy. Hankins is the guy who is just going to hammer between the tackles. I love the compliment of that. I like their receivers. They have talent on the offensive line. And their defense last year, I thought was solid as far as it being the first year of Kinney. If nothing else, they were extremely aggressive, created havoc plays, flipped the field. You could certainly get explosive plays back on them. It's why they were one of the funnest teams to watch, because it was like, it was just punch. Whenever they were playing people, you had these games with these ludicrous scores. But they went out, Hankins in the portal, but then guys on defense as well. They felt like they needed to get a better pass rush to keep the havoc where it was. They went out and signed a couple of really interesting guys. I think you had shouted them out before, but one of them interested to see the FCS star Stephen Parker coming up. Is he going to, put up big numbers there, keep the heat on the quarterback? I think this team is really, really good. I think they're the Sun Belt's best team, and you absolutely have a puncher's chance at the playoff, to your other point. And to people out there looking at the odds for that, the Texas State's odds to make was it like, do you happen to know off the top of your head?
Yes, I would know because I bet it. I bet 16-1. It's still 15-1
to make to make the playoff.
Yeah,
to me that is bettable all day. I'm not going to say to do your mortgage on it.
Yeah.
But you think this is how I always think about it. If it's 15-1, you just think about the season like 15. For people out there that watch Marvel, of course, I'm Thor. I starred in several of those movies, co-wrote them. But the Doctor Strange one, where Doctor Strange is giving you all the different realities. If Doctor Strange presented 15 separate realities of the way the college football season plays out, does Texas State make the playoff in one or more of those? I think absolutely. They have the talent. To me, they're the best team in the Sun Belt. I think that you agree with me. Yeah. And the other thing, the very important thing of thinking about the G5 team to get there, it's will the schedule facilitate it? One way to think about this is, could that team with one loss hop an undefeated Liberty, for instance? Because Liberty, by my metrics, plays 134th strength. Yeah. Liberty has literally the easiest schedule of the entire nation. They're the bizarro Florida, who plays by far the hardest. But Texas State, to me, their schedule is ideal. You start with the FCS opponent. Then you have a couple games where it's the kind of games where I would want to schedule if I was a top-tier G5 trying to make the playoff, in that they're both going to be impressive wins. If you win them, sort of feathers in the cap, but they're not games where you're going to be prohibitive underdogs. First one, UTSA. Why is that one important? Because UTSA to some people is the front runner in the AAC and certainly has been a heavyweight in the G5 going back a couple years. You bring them to San Marcos, and that's a team that UTSA has a ton of talent. Trailers back. In my mind, I always wanted to do tractor. The tractor trailer thing is tough with me. But the one question there for UTSA is a quarterback. You go from Harris to now McCown's kid. there's a big drop off there. They have talent at every other position, but catching them in early September at your home, I think that's big. You could absolutely pick them off there. My spread on that game is literally it's pick them for that game. And then in the next week, Arizona State, you travel to Arizona State, but Arizona State's certainly near the bottom of the P4.
Home Arizona State. Home Arizona State.
Oh, it is home against Arizona State.
Home.
How did they convince Arizona State to play in San Marcos?
I don't know. And Arizona State, a bad P5 team that maybe's on the rise, but it's almost like a free roll for you because sure, like maybe Arizona State finishes 4-8, let's just say. It doesn't kill you because it's still a Power 4 team, but it also, like, if you beat them, it's like, oh, well, like they beat the Power 4 team on their schedule. And I think they're going to beat I think they're going to beat them.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
So I mean, you go through the rest of the schedule, your home Louisiana, who we think is going to be an upper tier G5 team. That's pretty much it for like confirmed coin flip games because we think Troy and South Alabama, 2 road games, are going to be they're going to be worse than maybe expectation. I mean, you just go through, just look at the odds even. Like Auburn is plus 650 to make the playoff. They have no chance. There's not a world where Auburn's making the playoff. Texas State, 15-1. Let's just go through the G5 teams even. Liberty's 440. Boise's 4-1. Memphis is 550. Even Appalachian State's 14-1. And we don't like Appalachian State, but I think you need to put a little respect on some of these G5 teams' names because the margin for error for a Boise, a Liberty, a Memphis, and Texas State for that matter is pretty thin, where you could get nuked out of it on one mess up. So shouldn't they all be further back to back or closer to the, they're one direction, but they all should be closer together.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. I mean, the odds are that one of those 4 teams makes the playoff, right? I mean, one of them has to.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, whether it's Liberty, whether it's Boise or one of the top 2 teams in the Sun Belt, and very easily could be Texas State. Yeah. I think a 1-loss Texas State, assuming that loss does not occur in the Sun Belt title game, is going to make the playoff unless Boise goes undefeated, right? Or obviously in this scenario, Texas State would beat UTSA, but if Memphis ain't going undefeated, they got to play at Florida State. They also have to play road games against the other top AAC teams. It's certainly, if we got a 1-loss AAC team, you would be in the discussion. But I'm talking even the scenario where Liberty goes 13-0. Yeah. You know that the committee would like nothing more than to be punitive with Liberty for the no-show of last year's bowl game. And the argument will be, well, last year they were undefeated too against an equally crappy schedule, and we put them in and they were sacrificial lambs. Like, let's give, some other team that played a way better strength of schedule and lost 1 game. That's what I'm thinking about with this thing. And Texas State absolutely could do it. The schedule's setting up well. You could get that win against a Power 4 team. My number has Texas State favored against Arizona State by 5.6 points in San Marcos. I got the UTSA game as a coin flip, but contextually at home and early in the season against this team in a quarterback transition, I think very, very important there. Maybe you tilt it more towards Texas State. The road game against Troy after that is the hardest road game, that they have. Is the hardest road game on the schedule is at Troy. And we both don't like Troy. Just because the home field advantage, I have that game as a coin flip, but I personally, I would like Texas State in that one. The only other game on the schedule where I have them beneath a 65% win expectancy, it's the home game against Louisiana at 55 with my metrics. I like this Texas State team a lot. And this schedule, again, it sets up just so well. There is no guaranteed loss on it. In fact, there is not one game on this schedule where I have Texas State with a win expectancy beneath 50%. There are 2 at 50. There's 1 at 55. All the other ones are 65 and above. Love the offense. I think the defense is going to be better. The coaching staff is very clearly one of the best, certainly in the G5. I was almost surprised that Kinney did not get a Godfather offer from a P4. He is going to be getting that after this season. I believe this will be his last in San Marcos, but it could be a special one, and it could end in them becoming the second G5 team to ever make the playoff.
Yeah. And I also, so both McLeod and Finley, if you just go through their PFFs, 20 to 18 touchdown to interception ratio, or big time throw to turnover worthy play for McLeod last year. If you look a little bit further, where McLeod struggled is in the intermediate routes. It's called medium on PFF. So like between 10 and 19 yards. That's where you see a bit of a drop off. But he also, in James Madison's offense, more of a focus on that route. 21% of his attempts came on that intermediate route. GJ Kinney's offense is a lot of motion behind the line of scrimmage, short throws, speed in space, or the deep ball. Go a little bit further. Jordan McLeod throws a better deep ball than TJ Finley. Completed 44% of his passes on 56 dropbacks last year, which is pretty solid. 17 big time throws, did have 6 turnover worthy plays. So I do think the veteran McLeod could really drop into the system in a league he's familiar in. He was just a Sun Belt player of the year with a better offense, with a team that's top half of the country in terms of just pure talent. I think the sky's the limit for Texas State. So I like that we're aligned there. And we got to finish up, though. We got Troy. We got one more team we got to motor through before we get out of here. I know we went a little bit longer, Thor, but you've been a willing customer, so I appreciate it. Troy, they lose John Summerall after back-to-back Sun Belt championships. They hire Notre Dame offensive coordinator Gerard Parker, but it's a complete overall here. I didn't really love Parker when he was hired. Excuse me. Did a fine job at Notre Dame, but 129th in returning production. Just not a lot here. He had some West Virginia ties, so he brings over Goose Crowder, a former West Va commit. But passing game, lose their top 4 starters. They lose Vidal. Offensive line, they do bring back an all Sun Belt guy in their right guard King, but it's a full do-over here. And the defense that was also fantastic under Summerall, second lowest returning production. So this is a team that goes from 7th in EPA per play last year to God knows where. So we look at this, the win total, those 6.5, few gettable games. Is there any sort of optimism here for the Trojans in the post-John Summerall era?
Not for me. Yeah, they're one of these fall off a cliff kind of teams. It's a totally different, of course, staff, but also just roster from those teams the last couple of years that won 12 and 11 games respectively. I really like Summerall. Of course, he's gone, but you lose Vidal, even their veteran quarterback, who wasn't great, but at least he knew how to run the system. You've lost some receivers and defense. Before I like the ethos that they had of like, they like to have the 3 receivers on the field, try to thin out the box, run with Vidal. And then if you were going to sack the box against Vidal, that's when they'd start throwing it and Vidal would step up and be in pass pro. It was a very efficient offense because they could get the efficiency throws when they had the numbers advantage, because teams had the Kansas State game is a great example where Kansas State was finally like, we're not letting Kamani Vidal continue to just flash us. So then they were starting to put 8 guys in the box every time. This offense, and totally different philosophy as well, but also the personnel. Parker, it's going to be closer to an NFL style thing. So many new faces. How is that going to look? We really have no idea. And then all these defenders, I like the way that they put together their defenses the past couple of years, where it was a bunch of undersized guys, the guys that they had access to, but it was a bunch of sort of hair on fire type guys. Carlton Marsh would be a great example of this. Solomon as the edge rusher. They had a whole bunch of different guys like that where they would identify these guys in recruiting and then sort of build them up into these system cogs. And you mentioned you only have 2 starters back on defense. You're one of the least experienced defenses in the nation. You have the offensive guy who's coming in. You're going to have a different scheme on defense as well. I don't like this Troy team. You had the where they were before. You're going to have the huge drop off. I got 7.1 wins on Troy because the schedule is it does facilitate after the second and the third game there. It's a bit easier. I don't like Troy that much though. I would, for my money, it'd be more like 6-6, sneak into a bowl game, maybe even 5-7, and you're out of there.
Yeah, winnable games on the schedule. They open against Nevada at home. They will very likely lose at Memphis and at Iowa. Then it's Florida A&M, ULM. Maybe you're 3-2 before you play Texas State at home. Short week, you never know. You have home game against Coastal and Southern Miss. I think those are winnable games. And road games, you could argue 3 of these 4 are coin flips at South Alabama, at Arkansas State, at Georgia Southern, and then at Louisiana, I would say is the closer to a likely loss. So again, there's a little too much questions for me to bet the win total, but I do think that it's probably, wait and see on this team, maybe get a beat as the year goes on. Thor, I appreciate the time. This was awesome. I like that we see eye to eye on Texas State, of course. Best bets, do you have any before? I know we've kind of rambled on about them as we've gone through the show. Is there anything you want to share with the audience? And please plug your work and what you're doing over at MB Fantasy Life.
Yeah, outside of the win total, sort of gave some thoughts there. It would be the Texas State to win the conference, Texas State to make the playoff. Those playoff odds in particular are juicy. They don't seem to be accounting for the fact that a Power 5 team, Group of 5 team has to make it.
Yes.
So if you like Texas State as much as Reed and I do, and you were going to bet them to win the Sun Belt anyway, do yourself a favor and bet the playoff thing, because if they win the Sun Belt, there is a decent shot they'll be going to the playoff, depending on the way that looks. Again, I think if they can make it out of the regular season 11-1, they win that conference title game, I think there's a really good shot that they are the G5 entrant. So those would be my top ones. I also, if any, I don't know if a book offers this, but if they do the Sun Belt Player of the Year thing, maybe put a bet on McLeod. He might be the favorite against the field, but assuming he stays healthy, no reason to think that he won't. It's going to be absolutely bazooka numbers there. And I love the context you gave about his game. You have the short and the long thing. We already know that goes along with what Kinney does. You have adding the leg value in there. So big fans of that. Lots of bets to make in the Sun Belt this year. And then as far as my new stop at Fantasy Life, I'm new at Fantasy Life. Just hopped over there, but my college football season win total preview series is going to be beginning this coming week. Yeah. And after that, we're going to have, because we got to get through 10, you have the 9 conferences now, and then plus the independents. And I shoved the pack 2, or the 2-pack as we call it, in with them. You're going to have 3 to 4 per week in those 3 weeks that we have left. I can't believe we're so close now, but the 3 weeks we have left leading up to the week 0 week. So check Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life for that stuff coming starting on Monday. And then there'll be almost every single day after that. I go into I preview every single team, look at the schedule. I put out my table with my system spread, my system's win expectancy, my system's aggregate win total, compare that against the Las Vegas number, just like we sort of did here over the last hour. And then are you going to go over, under? Are you staying away from it? Been very successful on those season win total bets the last couple of years, over 60% on those on the documented ones that I put out. So hoping to do well again, but check us out at Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Yeah, he crushed it. And you heard that 60% on the spread. So that's real good. Win total bets for me. I bet the Old Dominion under 4.5 wins. You get that minus 125 over at DraftKings. I bet Texas State. I bet the trifecta. I went over 8.5 wins. I bet plus 105. I looked today. There's better than that. So go shop around. I bet them to make the playoff 15-1. I think that's just a sprinkle for the tracker. I'll do 0.2 units, and then 4-1 to win the conference. We'll do half a unit on that. So the trifecta of Texas State, we're all in on the Bobcats this year over in San Marcos. So for Thor, you can follow him on Twitter at ThorKU. Again, he's a college football and NFL draft analyst at MB Fantasy Life. You can follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach. The bets from the show are in the tracker in the description below. They're over on my betsamp as well at RW33. You can get them in real time. Hint, if while I record, I also share the bets. So you could probably just sneak ahead and get that. Well, until next time, we got one more conference preview to do. We got the MAC dropping next week. So make sure you're tuned in. And Thor, thank you again for the time. Maybe we'll have you on again sometime this season.